Welcome back to Rock Guitar Confidential with Scott and Ryan. Hey, are you ready for 10 minutes of random, witty, insightful banter? Well, today you're going to get it. And after that, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about making a living as a working musician. Stay tuned. All right, we're rolling.
Oh my God. Now the pressure's on.
Yes.
Red light fever is happening. I don't know what to do anymore. I was going to talk a bunch and then I'm frozen, man. I got nothing.
Yeah.
I don't even know what we're doing.
So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Print or printing. Anyway,
I don't know what we're doing. What does that mean?
Okay,
am I the Winter Soldier? Are you trying to activate me? Is that what's happening?
Actually, so that's what Vinny Appice, that's how he counted in right before tracking Rainbow in the Dark.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, they've remixed the entire Holy Diver album, and it's available now. And I've been listening to it this past week, and it's
now
awesome.
It's even more holiness.
Yes, even more.
20% more holiness.
Yes, the diving.
Only like 8% more diving, less diving.
Much holier diving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And dude, it's really interesting to listen to.
Dude, that's a great classic album. Actually, I'm pretty happy that that's happening nowadays. All these classic albums are getting remastered and released in different like formats and stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
I mean?
There's a couple places where, like, if I were Vivian Campbell, I wouldn't want my solo to be quite so naked.
Yeah.
But it's still awesome, dude.
It's so cool to hear Vivian back when he was like as young and hungry as you can possibly be.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Every solo is like you feel like the train's going to come off the tracks.
Yeah.
And then but it doesn't. But he pulls it back
going
in.
balls out the whole time. It's
totally
so cool.
Totally.
And what's funny is when you look at that and you go to Last in Line, there's a real progression in terms of his songwriting and how confident. You can tell that world tour or two really made him a much more mature player. You know what I mean? And then Last in Line and Sacred Heart, he's really takes a big step up in terms of the songwriting and how much he's crafting the solos more.
Yeah.
Less just sort of winging it. You know
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah.
There's something to be said for the winging part. Like when you listen to him just going to town, like that is really cool. You know?
Yeah, most certainly. And I love how Ronnie had a tradition. I mean, I guess Ozzy did too. Had a tradition of bringing up these young hotshot guitar players.
He also shared the tradition with Ozzy of firing them when they started asking for more money.
True. I read somewhere that Ronnie's attitude sort of stemmed from his experience working for Ritchie Blackmore.
Yeah.
And he sort of felt like, well, hey, when I got my shot in Rainbow, I didn't get paid shit.
Yeah. So you don't get paid shit either.
Yeah, I had to pay my dues, so you've got to pay your dues.
I heard Jakey Lee tell a funny story about Ozzy where, like, I guess after he got totally screwed, apparently he recorded the entire Bark at the Moon album with the promises that his deal was going to be this or this or this, and then right as he finished the last thing, they handed him his actual deal to sign, and it was like, okay, we're going to pay you a flat fee. You have no rights to any of this. You're going to sign over your songwriting rights to Ozzy. We're going to own the publishing. And he's like, well, that's not what we talked about. And she's like, well, you either sign this or we'll get another guitar player. We have the guitar parts now, so we'll have them come and do it. And you can see us in court if you want. And then I guess later on the Bark at the Moon tour, obviously you'd be a little sore about that if you're Jake. I guess Ozzy kept saying to him, like, I had to fuck you. When I got in my band, I got fucked over too. And one day you'll have a band, you'll fuck them over. And it's like, because apparently they're just thinking that's how you treat people. I don't know why they thought that. That cutthroatness is not how you build brotherhood. I can tell you who wasn't doing that was Geddy Lee, Neil Peart, and Alex Lifeson. They weren't doing that.
All for one for all.
To the end.
To the end. I mean, it's like, right?
And I look at that. Even Motley Crue, as fucked up as they are still together in their old age. You know what I mean? It's like you got to figure out a way to treat your brothers like your brothers and not be greedy.
Yeah, that's right, man.
But those guys, I mean, that's why they kept cycling through guitar players, both Dio and Ozzy, because they're like, okay, once you get to a certain level of fame and like you want to have a piece of the pie, some equity. It's like, well, no, we're just gonna get the next guy, and he's gonna start at the bottom of the bowl,
And Ronnie and Ozzy were kind of part of an old guard.
Yeah, it's true. They kind of crippled with two, like Iommi and Blackmore, kind of running the show that they were part of. You know what I mean? And
that's right.
That's unfortunate, though. I'll be honest with you. I think that sort of cutthroatness, and I think that stems to when there's not a huge pie to go around and everyone's equal, having an equal share of the tiny pie is fine. When there's a lot of money, and I think back in those days there was actually millions of dollars at stake.
Yep.
Then it's easier. It's harder to be brothers when there's millions and millions you're going to end up giving away if you do that.
Yeah.
If there's only like, hey, we have this, this Dorito chip, I'm going to split it 4 ways. Who cares? You know what I mean? I think that's in a way that's better now because people just do it because they love the music and they want to play with each other. Back then, it was a big business. You know what I mean?
and that's the rub. There's the business part, but then there's you as a creative entity, and to which do you defer in any given situation? Which is a great segue to today's topic. So,
well, hang on, before we do that, welcome to the Rock Guitar Confidential podcast with Scott and Ryan. And just to let you know what you're listening to.
That's right.
And Ryan was going to just drop the bomb on what's our topic for today?
Well, the topic for today is working and earning a living as a musician.
Yep, which is way more complicated than you would think. And what's funny is that I will talk my experience about this, and then we'll kind of go back and forth. And I have a unique experience because I've been a professional musician really my entire adult life. I mean, I started working as a musician full time when I was like 21 years old. That was, and so my whole adult life I've only been a musician. But I also, in addition to being a pro musician, have a family, and I've got kids in school and stuff, and I've been married for about 20 years and stuff like that. And it's interesting because when you're around other people with kids who are sort of around their same age or getting in their 40s and stuff, they don't have that experience as a musician. Like I've only known life as a musician. Those people have never known life as a musician. And what's interesting when it comes to making a living as a musician, what I find is an interesting insight is people who aren't musicians think that there's two paths. You either have a private jet or you're on a street corner with a hat in front of you. That's like the only two options. If you're a musician, you're either in a private jet flying around playing arenas, or you're in a street corner with a hat in front of you begging for tips.
I think that definitely, I think an aspect to that probably is that a lot of people conflate being a musician with being a celebrity.
Yeah, it's true. And the vast majority of musicians aren't famous. I mean, I always tell people okay, I'm sure you've never heard any of my stuff, but have you ever heard of like these 30 other very well-known musicians, and they have no idea? I'm like, well, there you go. Because you're not a music. You don't own music. You don't understand who musicians are. You might even know the band, but you don't even know who the people in the band are.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's ridiculous. But I think the vast majority of musicians are working musicians. You know what I mean? And one thing I would say is it's a tough life because you have no safety net. There's no 401k. There's no health insurance. Well, I live in the United States, so here we have no health insurance.
I mean, you're self-employed.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
you're a private contractor.
Double up on your Social Security payments.
Yep, exactly. And
you can take very limited tax deductions.
No, you take tons of tax deductions.
As many as you can.
Yeah,
but still.
You basically deduct everything you possibly can to make your income. That's another thing that kills you too. Is that if you deduct everything you can, then you come in when you go get a loan for something, you look like you make nothing on paper too. Because you're basically deducting your whole life more or less. And so there's a lot of obstructions financially to being a working musician, and that really comes down to there was a time. And what's funny is the more I've met people who I grew up listening to and talked to them and stuff, I find that as much as we think of the time in the 80s, let's say, with the heyday of the hard rock world, a lot of those guys weren't rich. They were living off of guarantees from the tour, and they were also living off of advances from the record label that they owed back. So sometimes they would get dropped from a label after 3 records and still owe the label $1 million or be $1 million in debt.
Right. So when you get that $1 million advance for your album, you can't just go out and party and buy new gear and everything. You've got to pay that back.
Yeah, and that
album
comes
sales
before you see a dime in royalties or anything. You know what I mean?
Or I guess these days it'd be streams.
Yeah. So, and then now, that was when you had the best possible scenario where the label put fronting cash so you can go out there and build a career. Now, with the long-term goal, meaning that, and this is so quaint to even think this way, that you're going to sell a bunch of records and that's where you're going to make your money, and off of publishing and licensing and then go tour and stuff. Now, basically, it's gotten streamed down that if you're a very, very well done, like an AC/DC kind of band, let's say, you can make a lot of money doing licensing, to the TV, movies, things like that, more so than you really could even, selling records of any kind, but mostly it's just about touring. That's really the whole business as a musician now. If you're going to be a road dog and you have enough of a following, you can do it. It's going to be basically touring as much as you possibly can.
And even then, music kind of isn't the main product anymore.
Yeah, it's the show.
It's the show.
It's almost like a Broadway show.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that's I think that's a major contributing factor to the phenomenon of popular quote music sucking, because it's not about the music.
I think also it's dilution of, there's so much product out there that is good and bad. And also another side thing that people don't talk about, and this is not really about what this podcast is about, but is that because there's no money in music anymore, they don't have money to pay $100,000 to a producer to come in and say, that idea sucks, that idea is good, let's do this again.
Right.
There's not really any kind of filter for ideas. It's just almost unfiltered musician ideas, which sometimes can be good, and sometimes that's why I think the quality is because it's like. The producer is not there to filter the ideas out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's something that people don't. When you look at all those classic albums from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, why they're so classic is they had really great producers who were guiding.
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
I think those Def Leppard records wouldn't be as classic if Mutt Lange hadn't been there.
Well, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. An old roommate of mine, we went to a local record store. That's a place where you bought physical media, either records or compact discs.
I think that only exists in archaeological evidence now. I don't think there's actually.
Yes, well, they just dug up a tomb in Egypt where they found
like
pile.
The Metallica Black album or something.
Yes. It was the Curse of Hetfield. It was the Curse of Bob Rock.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's a whole different story.
Hey, Bob Rock did the first Blue Murder record. He did Dr. Feelgood.
He did a lot of great stuff, except for that Black album.
The Daily Roth, A Little Ain't Enough was Bob Rock.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. That's cool. That's very cool. So, again, there's a producer, right, that puts a stamp on a bunch of stuff.
I think that's why music is so hit and miss nowadays because nobody can have a producer. Everyone's self-producing their stuff. And I think that as much as you can do a good job doing that, it's not going to be as good as if you had a guy whose professional job is to try and edit things and make them as good as possible.
Yeah, because you can't be objective about your own product.
Not at all. And I think that's why people tend to go self-indulgent sometimes. And I think the in suffers a little bit. But that's if you're lucky enough to even have, putting out records and stuff, which we do as well. So to my kind of view on this is like, okay, if you're a young, it sounds so old. If you're a young person and you want to be a musician, like what do you need to be aware of? Now, the one thing I would say is I would say if you're a guitar player, let's just speak from a guitar player point of view because that's what we are.
Yep.
Is that you got to be diverse in your skill set. And I would say the vast majority of the way I make my living is, and Ryan, to a large degree, the same thing, is private instruction of some sort, whether it be in-person lessons or Zoom lessons or teaching on different platforms, making instructional content for other platforms as well. That's like the vast majority of where the actual day-to-day, paying the bills money comes from. Yep. Then on top of that, like one thing that I do is I definitely do session work for other artists, and so I'll do guest solos on people's albums. I'll play on other people's stuff just for hire, and then I also have my own solo band, which I've put out records with, which again, it's the diversity you're throwing.
Which
it
is
out
called
there.
The name of the solo band
is.
My
band is Scott Allen Project,
and they're awesome,
very creative band name, and we've got 4 records, going to be 5 here this year. We're going to drop another one. My last album, if you're kind of curious, is Scott Allen Project. The name of the album is Escape Velocity. Very, very cool album. I actually had my great pleasure of having the guest keyboardist Derek Shrinian play keyboards on that album, which was really, really cool. So me and Derek get to trade solos back and forth on a bunch of the tracks on that. And then also on the upcoming album, too, there's Derek's on about half that album, too, which is pretty cool. So that's going to be really, really fun. So anyway, we got those albums out, and you're making money off that as well. And then I actually work with a company called TrueFire, and I have a lot of instructional video content available. And I've got a YouTube channel that's got some of that content as well. So long story short, you got to be able to do a bunch of things.
Yep.
You got to be able to do teaching. You got to be. Oh, I shouldn't even mention we perform live as well. So we'll go out and sell merch when we do shows. Obviously, for a musician who's not wildly famous, you can't go out and get big guarantees to go tour a bunch. So we basically just stay regional, just California. And our bread and butter has been a lot of just opening for national acts who come through our region. That's kind of what we typically will do.
Tour support for nationals.
Exactly right.
Yep.
So, and that's something that allows us to play for big audiences and sell merch, which is something else. But again, it's just another revenue stream. Even if it's not a ton of money, you want to have all these streams open so that you have all that money flowing in. You need something like bank on like teaching though, because teaching is going to be the things you can count on.
Reliable.
That's the thing that's going to be there all the time. Session work will come and go, and you'll have spots where you have a lot of work and spots where you have no work. Same thing with, sales are pretty, for records and streams are pretty consistent. I can tell you from the time I put my first record out, which was in 2006, to now, things have changed dramatically in terms of the revenue from putting out music. Because back then you actually would have people who would either download the whole album or buy the album physically.
Yep.
And so you make a lot more money per album sale. Now it's sort of, I can see with each release it getting more and more this way. It's become almost exclusively streaming and the odd, downloader sale here or there. In streaming, as much as people like to comfort themselves and say, hey, I'm an artist, you got to recognize that each stream is like a thousandth of a penny per stream.
It's like 0.000009.
Yeah.
percent of a penny.
It takes like 1,000 streams to even equal a penny, if that makes sense.
So that's just so awful.
Yeah, and then you're paying Spotify or Deezer, whoever it is you're using, Tencent, the money up front for your subscription. It's 99% that's going to that company, and then there's just pittance coming to us artists. And
so the money goes into the pocket of some CEO who,
and they split with the record labels, and then the artists get whatever's left over, which is kind of traditional. It's the way it's always been.
Right. Well, I mean, the record companies are kind of like pimps.
Yeah. So, but you have to recognize that's it. So they're going to have an income stream there, but it's not going to be something you're going to be able to go to pay your mortgage with every month, that kind of thing. So just look at it as additional income. It's kind of found money, basically.
It's gravy.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And to my mind, I would look at all my releases as like just really like an advertisement for my teaching business. You know what I mean? Hey, if you like what I play here, you can take lessons with me, and I'll show you how to play like this. You know what I mean?
Right.
That kind of thing, and it opens up doors. Sometimes you'll have people who will approach you to do stuff, and it's that's just it's like a business card more or less. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I remember you and I were at the NAMM show in what was it, 2018 or 2019?
Yeah, I think it was right before COVID. It was the year before COVID.
It was or the year before, something like that. And we were talking about how growing up, there'd be the guys at the guitar shop that were teaching to support themselves until the band made it big.
Yeah.
Now it's totally flipped on its head.
Yeah.
I mean, as full-time instructors, it's almost like we're close to the top of the food chain in terms of earning at least regular income.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of guys who were touring are finding it more difficult because they've kind of burned out their draw from touring so much that they're actually trying to start teaching themselves now. They're kind of getting in the teaching game and getting off the. I think also as you get older too, the idea of being in a van or a RV.
In a van down by the river.
So touring around to different clubs and stuff, just that the gleam gets off the rose on that one a little bit after you've been doing it a while. And you think, hey, what if I just stayed in one place and just play guitar?
Totally. And you have family, and those things become more important.
That I would say for me, that was a big thing. Like once I know I got married and had kids, it's like I don't want to be gone. You know what I mean? Unless there's something really amazing came up that I have to only be gone for like a month or two.
Right.
Sure, but I would consider that. But I'm not going to be, hey, I'm going to be on the road all the time. I want to see my kids grow up. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that it doesn't make sense I mean, look, I'm not going to judge anybody. There's other artists with kids out there that they feel like they need to be on the road. That's sort of part of their identity, or they feel like that's just the only way they can make the best income, or something like that, or some combination of those things. I'm not going to judge that. Everyone's got to make their call.
There's a lot of bands that just fly out to do weekends, like go fly out for Rocklahoma,
or work at a guitar shop on the
and
days during the week, and then they'll fly out and do a couple of shows. I think like guys like Trickster are probably in that kind of world.
Oh yeah, that
maybe
makes
do
sense.
some producing on the side, that kind of thing. But again, that comes down to what I was saying before, doing a lot of different things. Like they're not just like hey, we're going to go tour. There's really a tiny 2-3% of rock and roll bands who have the level of draw that can go out and tour consistently and make a nice income doing it. The vast majority, that's a cost-benefit ratio. It's like it comes down to how much do I want to play? Can we at least break even doing this?
Yep.
And which again, if you got a family to support and a mortgage, the idea of I'm going to go tour for 4 weeks and we're going to break even, that isn't going to work. You know what I mean?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. So. Obviously, that's doing original music. That's kind of the perspective I bring into it.
Yeah.
You have more experience with the cover band world. So, like, what's your
So the cover band. So for years, I would teach primarily, and then to supplement that, play in cover bands around the area. And I'm talking. I think the last time I played regularly in a cover band was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and. I remember particularly one. Here's one anecdote. So we were doing 3 1-hour sets, right?
Which is actually not bad. Sometimes it's 5.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like 3 1-hour sets. You're playing like maybe 40 songs, maybe 45 songs. And so in between sets, the drummer comes out and says, "Hey, there's someone here who wants to hire us to do a wedding."
Yeah,
it's a 5-piece band, and I looked at him and I said point blank, $5,000.
Yep, which is actually very reasonable for a wedding band.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what the rate should be.
Actually, most wedding bands are probably getting closer to 10. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
DJs will charge $7,000 for a freaking DJ. You know what I mean?
And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, well, I already told him $1,500." So I said no, and that was kind of the last straw, because it used to be I could command a minimum of $100 an hour. So 3 sets, I need to walk home with $300.
Yep, per person in the band.
Yeah, per person. I mean, I personally need to, and in that
not
band,
for the whole band. Not for,
in that band in particular, there were times where other band members not that I'm hot stuff or anything, but I think my attitude was known. Other people gave up their cut to pay me for it.
Oh, okay.
And it just became kind of a, so basically this is just, I'm a full-time musician.
Yeah.
Everybody else.
This isn't a thing you do on the sideline.
Yeah, this isn't a thing I do on the side. This is what I do, 6 days a week and get paid for it.
Yeah.
Everybody else had day jobs, and so it was
Not there's anything wrong with that.
There's something wrong with that. No, yeah, I'm totally not. I think that's great for those people who are friends of mine. It's
well,
cool.
I think the thing that about like where you're coming from, though, is you have to have your skills at a professional level. You can't like have a day job and be able to develop yourself as a player like you have. Well, you need that time to just devote to your craft. It's just what it is. You know what I mean? And
absolutely,
that's the difference between a pro musician and someone who's a hobbyist. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And certainly, I had issues with the level of musicianship in the band. That was a problem. And it was a friend band that just wanted to go out and play.
Yeah, just because for the fun of it.
And in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But your local bar owner knows that.
Yeah, takes advantage. Well, that brings us to a really important point of musician life, which is you have to advocate for yourself and get paid. Yep. You can't just like go do stuff for free because it's almost like it's easier to be hard ass and demand more and then lighten up, and then come in and say, hey, whatever, and then start trying to demand more later. You have to start saying, okay, this is the minimum that I'm willing to do for, and then be willing to walk away from something if you're not going to get paid for it. That's really important. Like if you say, hey, I'll do, if I had an experience when I was doing sessions, one of my clients with session work, I started off with this platform I was using I was charging a relatively low rate per hour. Just because I wanted to get as much work as I could. And then I found as I started getting work in, and it took so much time that I was like making, at the end of the day, like $10 an hour or something like that. And I just kind of realized it's not worth my time to do that. I need to charge a rate that's going to be commensurate with what I deserve. And then if that means I get less work, then I get less work. But at least I'm getting paid for the time.
That's
right.
You
know what I mean? And that's sort of my approach to that. And for playing live, if you're playing in a, whether it be you're doing a sideman gig or you're doing something like that, you need to make sure that you get paid for what you think is worth your time to do it. And you need to sign contracts, not do the work first and then sign the contract later. You
get paid up front.
Well, or at least sign the contract that you have them legally obligated, that you can go back at them and get that money recovered somehow or another.
That's right.
Anybody who's reputable is going to pay you, which, by the way, there's a lot of people in the music world that aren't reputable.
Yeah, totally.
But you have to sort of like have that attitude and be willing to walk away from something. And I think that the desperation that a lot of times musicians have to get a foot in the door or to get something. If I work with this person, this is going to open up these doors. Maybe is something that's powerful, and people take advantage of that and realize, okay, well, this person's willing to do whatever, so I'm just going to just take them and rake them over the coals because I know they'll do whatever.
The old cliche about you're going to play for exposure.
Yeah.
I so bumped into my neighbor yesterday, and he plays guitar also, and he plays in a cover band. Actually with some of the same people that hopefully they never listen to this podcast. I love all of them.
These
personally.
Wonderful people who are wonderful.
Actually, they really are wonderful people, like hands down. I really connected with the keyboard player. He's a great guy. So I mean, personally, I really do love all these people. We were going to hang out on New Year's, but the pandemic, I don't play in their cover bands anymore.
Sure.
And it's, so we were talking, and he said, the band's going great, and, there's this, we're getting booked all over the place, and, we're going to play at the Crocker Art Museum. Our bass player wanted to get this much money, but I told him I just do it for free because I want to play the Crocker.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself...
Yeah, that's the problem, right?
If I want to go to the Crocker Art Museum, I'm going to go. Like, I don't want to play anywhere for nothing.
Yeah, that's almost like the equivalent of like someone who's like a non-union person saying, "I will go and I'll just work for $2 an hour instead of $15 an hour. I just want to work at that place." It's like that just dilutes the waters for everybody else.
And also to clarify, if I'm playing someone else's, that's not fun.
Yeah.
That's work. I don't want to play a song someone else wrote.
Yeah,
I want to play a song I wrote.
Or you want to do something that at least you somewhat enjoy, and you get something out of the experience besides just the money too. But I don't know, man. I feel like that whole like I'll play for free or for peanuts or for exposure is just it's such a ploy that people use to not have to pay musicians. And I'll tell you.
Yep.
Art is so devalued in our entire existence right now. And music, as much as even the pop stuff is so terrible, even that's not valued really. It's seen. I almost think like it's like tap water. People say, "Oh, I just turn on the faucet and there's tap water all the time. Why would I pay for that?" That doesn't make sense to me. That's just as much as I want.
I mean, if making music were easy, everybody would do it.
Well, everyone thinks they can do it.
Everyone thinks they can do it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think there's two phenomena at play here. One is say if it's your private event, then there's DJs out there
Yeah.
who just press play.
Yep.
And then if you want to bring someone who actually does play, the market is saturated with hobbyists.
Yep.
And that's also
And also
problematic.
people hiring don't know the difference, and because like, well, this other band I talked to, they'll do it for $2,000. It doesn't, not going to charge me $6,000 for this, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, you're going to get what you get. You know what I mean? And you know what's funny is I've noticed that even like the big casino gigs and stuff, a lot of the cover bands are getting big enough where they can actually go. I mean, the bands that take it seriously,
Yep.
like if you're like a Rain, tribute to the Beatles kind of thing, or like
or like Pop Fiction,
yeah,
who does covers. They're awesome.
yeah, there's a bunch of bands who really do the whole thing, like the full show, like almost like the original band. And those those guys are getting booked.
Well, and those are
big
the tribute bands, which I
Yes.
think should be there should be a differentiation with just the cover band. My buddy Tom plays in a Pat Benatar tribute called Invincible, and they're awesome. But that's a tribute band.
Yeah, tribute bands, I think, to be successful in that world. I mean, like I've never played in a tribute band, but what I see is the bands that crush are the ones who do the whole hog thing. They basically will pick an era from that band, and they'll have the clothes that match the era, the instruments that match the era. They try and get tones that are really close to the era, and they just essentially, it's almost like if you could go back in time and see, Pat Benatar in 1983 or something.
Yeah, like Invincible does. We'll have to have. His name's Tom Murphy. He also is an instructor over at Skips Music.
Yeah.
Good longtime friend of mine. And I mean, they do the whole look, the whole performance. We'll have to have him on the podcast.
Which is how you have to do it, because you have
Yeah.
to have a situation where you're like, it's like seeing that band. That's what people are paying for. It's like what Steel Panther used to be like when they would do the Van Halen tributes.
When they were at rock school.
But they would do like this the Van Halen thing, so you come out with like the striped overalls and stuff. And there's like, what's that other band?
There was Atomic Punks.
Yeah, when they were Atomic Punks.
Yeah, fun fact. I was playing in a cover band. Opening for Atomic Punks at the Powerhouse Pub when I met my girlfriend.
Oh, that's awesome.
When I met Misty, we've been in 14 years later, we're still together.
You know what's hilarious? I did a similar thing. Like we opened up at this club called the Roadhouse with my band Scott Allen Project. We opened for a Kiss tribute band.
Oh, rad.
And I remember we were finishing our set, and as we were getting ready to do our last song, the guys like dressed as Gene and Paul and Ace and stuff walked by with full makeup, and the crowd it was really interesting.
Was it Spiro who does the Gene character? There's a certain guy who's known.
I don't remember what it was.
Simmons.
I don't remember which version of the band.
It definitely wasn't Mini Kiss, right?
No, it was regular Kiss tribute.
It was regular,
but they did the
Kiss.
whole thing.
Okay.
They did the whole thing, and I remember just thinking, what am I doing? Like I'm sitting here opening for a Kiss tribute
Oh, man.
band.
Did he breathe fire?
Yeah, they did the whole
Rad.
thing. It was a trip, man. I remember thinking like the only reason I even booked at that club is that I remember the Savatage who played there like a couple months before that. I thought if Savatage can play this place, it's going to be a pretty cool place, and it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. That was in Rio Linda, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was awful.
That was the same dude who ran Big Shots.
Yeah,
who
Mikey.
owned that place.
Yeah, he was the booking agent there, and that Big Shots was actually a great place.
I loved Big Shots.
That did
so
not
much.
last at all.
Well, then here's another problem: is that all the venues get shut down because the neighbors in the suburbs complain about the noise.
which is why rock and roll clubs are always in not great places. They're always like in weird niches downtown or some kind of weird industrial areas or something like that.
Under the overpass.
Yeah, it's never like a classy kind of rock. Even in Hollywood, like people are, the Viper Room. The Viper Room's a hellhole, man.
Yeah.
The whiskey is like, it's living on its past glory, man. That place is, I mean, they're cool. It's cool for the history. You walk into a place like the Whiskey, and I remember, the first time I played there, going upstairs and seeing all the people who've carved their name into the walls and the halls in the back and stuff. And you're aware of the history. Like Zeppelin played here, the Who played here, Van Halen broke out of this place. You're aware of it, but then you look at what it actually is now. It's like this dirty hole that's just like every other. For some reason, like every rock club has got cloned and reproduced everywhere else, and they're all the same.
Yep.
I don't know what it is.
They found the formula and then
they cloned it
reproduced
again and again and again. And
Yeah.
I always tell people there's no such thing as a classy rock and roll club.
No,
it
not
doesn't
at all.
exist. You know what I mean? They're all dirty holes. Thank you for listening to the Rock Guitar Confidential podcast with Brian and Scott. Please make sure to rate and subscribe, as that helps us out quite a bit. Now let's get back to the working musician's life. It's so amazing. It's really just as glamorous as it sounds. So back to it. You know what I mean? It's weird. So I don't know. I find him gross, man.
That's all right. That's all right. I'm just using some self-control over here. So
I think that I don't know. There's no right or wrong. One thing I'll say is that there's no judgment coming from me on how you choose your path as a musician.
Yeah, this is awareness.
Just
you know?
I would say, advocate for yourself. Make sure you have a way of creating steady income as a musician, whether it be teaching or sessions or doing sideman gigs. Like sometimes there's a lot of artists who are signed to labels that have some name and some draw, and then they can pay you a decent amount of money. I mean, you're never gonna. I would say this: you're never. At least it's very unlikely you're going to become rich and famously wealthy doing this.
Yeah, I think the goal is just to be self-supporting.
Yep.
It's just to be self-supporting.
Doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And having to be able to play music as your vocation. And that's something that's challenging. I tell you, especially as you get older, like, especially me, like I always find myself in situations where I'm around other guys around my age who, didn't go the arts route, who are like, lawyers or doctors or captains of industry or whatever kind of thing. And, and they kind of look at me with a quizzical look on their face, like, you play guitar? It's like, yeah, that's what I do. And then it's like, well, and then I'll ask, what do you do? And then they'll tell me, and I don't know what that means. Like, what is that? What do you actually do?
It means
like,
I have to wear a collared shirt every day, and I have to work in an office or a cubicle.
I'm an import-export consulting coordinator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically,
What do you actually do though? Like, what are you doing?
It involves submitting TPS reports, whatever those are.
Well, I mean, it's like I just don't have a clue. I mean, you make $300,000 a year, but what do you actually do? Like, what are you doing with your life? Like, is there anything you do of any value to anything?
Any one of us could take a wrong step on the street and get hit by a car and be gone tomorrow.
Yep.
And I just can't imagine. I've had corporate businessy jobs, and yeah, it's just the whole time I just missed playing music for a living. I can't live that way.
I always tell people, like, I'm never driven by money. Money has never driven me to do anything or not do anything. I mean, you need a certain amount of money and income, especially if you have family. You need a certain amount of money to be comfortable. You know what I mean? But beyond that, like, what are you willing to sacrifice for that extra however many dollars more you're going to make? What do you have to give up for that? You know what I mean? And to me, I've always thought, like, I'm never going to do or not do something based on how much money it's going to make me. You know what I mean? I want to do something. It's got to be a certain threshold for me to be able to support myself and my family.
Yep.
But beyond that, it's like I don't really see a need to, like, go, okay, if I can make another $40,000 a year if I did this, but I would hate doing that.
Right, like a non-musical thing.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, that doesn't run counter to, here's my rate for going to play a gig. Here's my rate for teaching. Here's my rate for doing a musical thing. It's the difference between doing a musical thing or a non-musical thing.
And doing some kind of corporate thing or something like that. And I think it's a strange time. The music is so devalued now. It's even if you're teaching a credential and you're teaching at like a high school or middle school or a college and you're a music teacher, the first thing that gets cut is the music program.
Yep.
So even if you have that job, you're not really you have almost no more security than doing what we're doing, being private contractors. You know what I mean?
Maybe less.
Yeah. It's like one of those things where you look at it and it's like, okay, there's just no place that values music.
Well, and I know how much.
don't want to pay for bands. Those labels don't pay rec for, it's almost like they know that you would do it no matter what, and they pay you accordingly.
Well, and given what your typical elementary school or high school teacher earns, I know I earn as much or more than they do.
Yeah. But with a lot more freedom and flexibility.
Totally.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But that being said, you're not going to be fabulously wealthy. You're not going to be flying off to Monaco and, you know what I mean, and wearing Armani suits.
You have to not care about those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I don't.
Yeah, you don't. But I think it all comes down to, like, what is your life going to be? And I think that there's certain artists who got into music to get famous and get chicks and to get money. And then there's other people who play music because they want to play music. And that's just what's in their heart.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Not to get too sappy about it, but I think that really is what it comes down to. And, there's a lot of satisfaction, especially as an instructor, when you can impact on someone else's life and help them, like, achieve goals that they want to achieve and watch them flower into a great musician themselves. There's a lot of satisfaction that comes with that, and knowing that you kind of help put someone on a path. That there's no amount of money that equates to that. Does that make sense?
No, none at all. I just this last Saturday, my student Russell Abria had his last lesson because he's going to college. He wrote me a very nice thank you card. It was very yearbook.
Yeah.
Kind
Thanks
of
for
thing.
everything, man.
I wouldn't change a thing. It was great. But no, he said, hey, look, I walked into your studio with a little blue guitar when I was in 4th grade.
Yeah.
And then that guitar became a little red electric guitar, and then it became my awesome pink electric guitar.
This relationship that you've impacted on them. And
we got I guess now like 4 years. So he was my student for over 8 years, right? And Yeah, so like one Christmas, I helped his dad buy him a Gem Junior.
Oh, nice.
Because he had the little 3/4 size for a while, but he was getting too big.
Yeah,
right?
he needs a real
So
guitar. Yeah.
that's why so we have our neon guitars at our lesson and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, and I was thinking, even if I were an elementary school or a high school teacher, I'd only have those kids for 1 year.
Yeah.
I had Russell for 8.
Yeah.
I watched him grow up and,
So true.
built a relationship with his family,
Yeah.
and
And
you know,
it
the
would
whole
be someone they remember their whole life. You know what I mean?
yeah, and the whole time that I used to work in outside sales in the construction industry, and yeah, I'd never have that.
No, and you don't have anything that you do that's tethered to anything that means anything to you. You
Yep.
know what I mean? And I think that's the challenge. And I think, it's not that you can't make a good living doing what we do, but at the same time, what matters to you? If you're a guy who wants to have a Rolex and drive a Maserati, you're not in the right business if you're getting into the music world.
No, not at all.
No, you're going to be driving a very modest car. You're going to have, you're not going to live in an enormous house. You're going to have an okay house that's nice, but you're doing it because you play music.
Yep.
That's what you just got to make that bargain with that. And you want your life to be about music. And I mean, it's not just even making other great musicians, like helping them become that, but it's just like giving people a good experience with music and educating as many people as you can about music so that they can then demand more from the music itself. Like instead of just, oh, sure, I think Ariana Grande is awesome. Like maybe they kind of dig a little deeper and like, hey, there's this band Led Zeppelin, you should check them out.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Or Camila Cabello. Okay, her song's got this Spanish flair to it.
Yeah.
So
this is the Phrygian mode.
Well, and here's Paco de Lucia and Otmar Lieber to check out this flamenco stuff. It can go a number of directions.
But you're trying to basically educate people musically and to give them a good experience with music. That I think sometimes a lot of the school and middle school band programs really fail on that because they don't have good experiences musically with that. They really kind of walk out. I mean, not everybody. Some bands programs are good, but I feel like very few of the students I get who switch to guitar who come from band programs had good experiences. They're usually kind of very disappointing.
I've noticed that. So I have one student. She's Vlished in her school band. She's a leader in it, and she's great. She's very, very smart. She's very talented. But like at her guitar lesson, we're just working on improvisational skills. We're working on improvising.
Yeah.
Because when you're in school band, you're reading a chart and you're playing what's on the chart.
Yep.
You don't. It's not. Dare I say it's not really creative. It's not creative on the part of the performer.
Good in that context means you do it exactly as written.
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting experience. So the great thing is when I pull out a chart, she can read it, and then we can fast forward to what modes will work over this progression, and then we can get down to it. But so now it's just all about building up our chops and learning how to express, and it's a whole different thing.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that I would describe what we do is in the arts, and it's sort of intellectual too. It's about teaching people how to think and how to use very complex stuff. I mean, I think what we do is, especially when it comes to improvisation, understanding harmony, technique, it's all about discipline and language skills and understanding complexity and harmony and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I think that there's so many aspects. I think one other thing that's nice about being a musician professionally too, compared to being an import expert person or whatever, or being an HR representative or a marketing manager, is that every day is slightly different because you have different people coming in the door. You have to use different skill sets to help people understand what they're doing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that, if you're a musician like what we're doing, like you also have bands that you're promoting and putting out records. You have to develop marketing skills. You have to understand things like, IT skills, like internet technology, understanding how to build websites, how to do marketing, how to do viral marketing. There's like 10 jobs wrapped up in being what we do as a musician.
Oh, absolutely. And then that's not to mention there's a fair number of special needs students that I teach, and then learning how to communicate with them and meet their needs.
On their specific needs that they do.
Absolutely. That's a whole other skill unto itself.
As opposed to sitting in an office and just basically
Yep.
sending out emails and just taking up being a warm body.
I'll take this order. I won't take an order.
Yeah.
When's my shipment coming?
Yeah,
in?
exactly. I just can't imagine. After I graduated music school, when I first got into the world as a professional musician, I found that I had my mornings when I wasn't practicing. I would have a few hours. So I went back to college just because I thought, hey, when I'm 45, I was like 21 at the time. I was like, maybe I don't want to be a guitar player when I'm 45. Let's go get our degree in business and economics and stuff like that. And I remember going through that whole process and then studying accounting and economics and business management and things like that. And I remember getting to the end of that associate's program and thinking man, I would want to jump out of a window if I had to be an accountant. I can't even imagine how soul crushing every day of my life being this would be. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
And then I remember it's the last day of in my business program. The teacher's like, okay, as you guys get out into the world, this is going to be what you could possibly make. And I looked at that, I'm like, oh, I make more than that right now. and I get to play guitar. What am I doing?
Yeah, well, and you know, to put a little bow on that, you know, one thing I love about being a music teacher, a guitar instructor, like I have a student right now who is an accountant.
Yeah.
And I'm just so happy to help nurture that part of his life.
Yeah.
Because he's an accountant.
Yeah. That just needs some kind of outside thing of some sort, you know, fantasy sports, something. Give them something they kind of want to get out of bed in the morning, you know.
Yeah, so that's very rewarding. Is that you know, we're able to help people grow that part of their lives that maybe they couldn't or didn't emphasize the way that you and I did.
Yeah, you know,
and
I think
that's great.
What it comes down to when it comes to being a professional musician, though, is you have to get paid. You can't let your love of the art be so all-consuming that you are willing to say, I'm going to not take any money or not advocate for yourself to get what you know you're deserving. It takes a lot of guts, because especially if you're doing a gig, like say you're going to be hired on as a touring guitar player somewhere, you know, one thing that the people doing the hiring are very aware of is there's a lot of other people who would like that gig. You know what I mean? And
they'll use that to their...
And exactly, it's kind of a take it or leave it sort of thing. You know, if you either it's you or there's 10 other people out this door who want this gig, so I'll take what I'll give you, and that's that.
Hey, again, I told the guys we do the wedding for $1,500.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean by being willing to walk away.
Yep.
And saying it's not worth my time to do that. You know, sometimes you have to be calculated about that because it depends on the gig. You know what I mean? Maybe it's worth it for whatever name bump it's going to give you and what that next stepping stone might be. You know, you have to kind of be aware of that and kind of make a conscious decision about what's the most valuable thing. Like I remember when this must have been like 2001 maybe, I want to say. I got approached by the local radio station 98 Rock to use my music in their Bod Squad calendar DVD, which is some DVDs they put out with a bunch of models and stuff, and they would release it in the Sacramento, like Northern California region. And then I said, "Oh, cool. How much does it pay?" And they say, "Well, we're not going to pay you anything, but we're going to play your music and we're going to credit you the whole time." And I remember thinking for just a beat, I'm like, okay, it's my first record. Yes, it was in Guitar Player magazine. Sure, that was helpful. But I could either do that or not do that. It doesn't cost me anything. So it's like, sure.
Yeah, well, you just had to give them permission.
Yeah.
So it's like you had to record something from scratch.
Everything's there. I just, okay, sure, just give me permission or give me credit, and then send people to my website, and that's good enough, I guess. You know, that's basically marketing. That's all that is. You know what I mean?
Which would be if you were actually, you know, doing marketing from scratch, that would cost money.
Yeah, exactly. So in a way, they're kind of paying it.
So that's a calculated thing. Yeah.
That's what I mean by you have to make decisions based on what is this going to do for me, and what's the possible value of this down the line. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that's tough to know, and that's every situation is different. So you're gonna have to sit and figure out what makes the most sense to you there. And I think the biggest challenge is you have to recognize why you're doing it. You know, if you're getting into being a musician because you want to be famous or you want to make a shit ton of money, you know, you missed the boat. That ended at about 1990. You know, when that could possibly happen for rock and roll, at least. You know what I mean?
I remember when I was a kid in the late '80s, early '90s. There were some guys that played in a band at the shop, and they did originals. Right? Mm-hmm. Their band was sponsored by Budweiser.
That's so cool.
Isn't that great? Yeah. Like there'd be a local band that had a sponsorship from a beer company.
Yeah, yep. It's true. I mean,
that's a thing that happened.
And I think that's a time where there was corporate interest in rock and roll, and then you had labels who would literally, you know. I kind of respect the early days of what the labels were doing in the 80s because they would put a band out on tour and give them tour support. Yes, they're going to have to get that money back on the record sales, but they would give them 3 years to go out and tour and open for tons of people and build an audience.
Yeah.
And the reason that those bands can still make a living today is because they had that 2 or 3 year window to go tour for 3 years, opening for Poison or whoever it was.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And getting lots of eyeballs on them.
Yeah, Van Halen got to go blow Ted Nugent off the stage in their early career.
Black Sabbath, Journey. You
know,
all those
that's
bands.
right.
You know, all those bands got a chance to, you know, have Van Halen open for them. But Van Halen built a following through touring with like Ted Nugent and you name it. You know, all those people in that time. Kiss, same thing.
Yep.
You know, I think that's something that doesn't exist anymore. There's not really a leg up. Like once you got signed to a label back in the day, they would give you sort of like a lift up to the next level because they'd let you go. They would support you on the road. They would promote your record and stuff like that. Once this whole downloading thing happened and once the labels kind of fell apart, then the idea of giving a big advance or giving even tour support to a band wasn't really a thing anymore.
Yeah,
you
I
had
think-
to or be fully formed before a label would even look at you.
I've got to give Lars Ulrich a lot of credit for coming out against Napster.
Yeah.
What he did.
He was
That
totally right,
He was
yeah.
totally right.
And there's no argument to
Absolutely.
be made that like it's fine that I download people's music for free. It's like, well, that's just stealing. That's,
Yeah, that's just
exactly
theft.
equivalent to walking in Target and just grabbing stuff and walking out.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There's just because that band's rich, like you're still stealing.
Yeah,
Even
it
if they're
doesn't
rich.
matter. Yeah,
you
you
go
have
break
to
into
be
some,
able to, we talk a lot about, we've been talking about getting paid for what you do.
Yeah,
When I ask other musicians to work for me, I pay them.
yeah, for their time. Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense.
absolutely.
Yep, and that's the only way you can really be reputable.
Yeah,
is doing
that's
that.
right.
You know what I mean?
I certainly know if anyone else asks me to play for them, then they'll pay me.
Yeah, it's true.
Because you got to put it out there too, and you got to live by that.
I think the other thing too is that when you're trying to decide whether this is for you, I mean, I know for you and I, we kind of knew really early in our lives that this was going to be our thing. I knew at like age 10 that
Yep.
like this is what I was going to do. You know what I mean? It wasn't something I was hemming and hawing about through high school or something. I pretty much knew like the entirety of like, what I can remember, basically.
Yeah.
From the time I discovered Van Halen, I'm like, that's what I'm going to do.
Oh, absolutely.
You
For
know
me,
what I mean?
for me, it was more Randy, but yeah, definitely
Same idea.
same thing. Just
Yeah.
growing up immersed in it.
Yeah,
And,
and then but the joke was on us that we didn't know rock and roll was going to end in like 10 years when we started.
well, and to be fair, I mean, rock and roll had preceded us, and so we had no reason to believe
It was going to end. Yeah.
Yeah, we had no reason to believe that the grunge apocalypse was going to happen.
Yeah.
I didn't see that coming.
You know what's funny? If you talked to me in the early 90s, like when I was like 12 or whatever, but I would have totally been like, oh, I think bands like Extreme and Saigon Kick are going to be the future, man. It's going to be these bands that are really eclectic, but really great
or like
musicianship.
Taikedo's going to be huge.
Yeah. Or even like bands like Primus, like more outside the box kind of thing, or
Yeah.
Faith No More. I thought that might
Oh
be
yeah,
going
I remember specifically thinking Faith No More. Like, oh, this is the way.
almost impossible to like put into a box. They were kind of all over the place. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I remember thinking that was very innovative.
I thought
Very-
that was
yeah.
going to be the future. I didn't
Yep.
realize it was going to be like horrible, like watered down pop punk was going to be the
Oh
future.
God,
You know what I mean?
It just
And-
all went so wrong.
Yeah, it's
It just
exactly.
all went so wrong.
You guys are probably already. This is only about our 12th episode, and you're already sick of hearing us talk about the grunge apocalypse.
Well, it's an important perspective that needs to get out there into the public.
yes,
so.
I agree. Everyone needs to feel a little worse today. They should know that the world ended a little on the day Nevermind came out.
Hey, God, right? If only we could never mind that
Yeah.
recording. But yeah, hey, maybe some people listen and they do the work to discover some cool new rock music, and there's still people out there that love it.
One thing I will say though, if you're going to be a professional musician, and this is something I think needs to be, and maybe the main focus of what you have to focus on is you have to be great. You can't half-ass it. You
Yep.
have to be great and do a lot of things well.
Yep.
That's because there's a lot of other guys who claim to be musicians that you're going to have to be competing with, and you have to be able to just walk into any situation and know you can own it. You know what I mean?
You got to be a total boss.
Yeah, you have to take your craft seriously, and I think that's the thing, is that if you walk in thinking you're just going to like play a couple chords and I'm going to be good, you are not going to make it. You have to be able to. It's funny, we're painting such a dystopian picture here. It's like you have to dedicate your whole life to it, and at the very end, you can make as much as an elementary.
Well, hey, you know what? I'll give two really easy tips that will filter out at least 50% of the competition. If you're out there playing covers, or if you're playing in a band, don't drink.
Yeah, that's
Straight
true.
up.
Take it seriously. It's a job.
Yep.
Yeah.
Don't drink when you play a gig. Like not even one.
And really, don't drink when you're recording.
Oh
Yeah.
God, of course
Yeah.
not. Oh,
Yeah.
definitely not. But you'll get called for gigs if that's what you want to do. If everybody knows that you don't drink,
Yeah.
not a beer, not And again, that was another thing that kind of bothered me about the last couple cover bands. If the drummer's not keeping the tempo, but I saw him have a beer when he showed up,
Yeah.
I immediately lose respect,
Yeah.
and that's very frustrating.
We're all in this as a team. Everyone's got to be on the same page. And,
Yeah, totally. You don't show up at the gig and then immediately order a hamburger and have a beer.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one. Don't drink. Number two, and this goes for teaching as well. Be punctual.
Yeah. Be
You've gotta-
reliable too.
Yeah, reliable. You've got to be there every time.
When you say you'll be.
When you say
ready
you'll
to
be.
do what you said you're going to do.
Yeah, maybe a student will forget about a lesson. You must never,
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
A student should never show
Don't
up and you're not
schedule
there.
sessions. Don't tell someone like I'm going to do sessions. I'll have it to you by Wednesday and have it Friday or something. You know what I mean? You can't do that because your reputation precedes you, and you're going to get what kind of work that you show that you're capable of getting. So you have to sort of like be the guy who's always on time, always has it.
Yep.
And you got to have your. You can't not practice.
Yep.
As a pro musician, you need to be practicing as much as you can because you have to keep all of your chops available to you at all times.
That's right.
You can't have an off day because you can't guarantee when that session is going to show up, that student's going to show up, that gig's going to come drop in your lap. You can't say, oh, now I got to cram for it. You should be ready all the time.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And that's something that's just part of your life. It's not even like you have to think about it. It's just part of your life. Do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know,
Last time I played in a cover band, it was a phone call on Wednesday. Hey, can you be ready for 30 songs on Friday? Yep.
Same thing can happen if you're going to do a sideman gig or something like, here we're going to send you lead sheets. I mean, we'll be ready for rehearsal on 2 days from now.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's 2-hour sets. You know what I mean? Yep. And it's like, and then you can't, if you get that call, you have to make sure that when you show up, that you have those songs down, like not sort of down. Not I went through them once or twice. You should be able to play that set that day. Yep. And have it down. That is what being a pro is all about. And that's what I mean by you got to take it seriously.
Yep.
You can't sort of half-ass anything, not from your technique, not from your punctuality. It is a profession. And that's, I think, if you can't check those boxes, then you're not really in the right business.
Here's a fun anecdote. There's a well-known local guitar player who was going to just do, I think it was maybe a 7-song set. The idea was we're going to play Def Leppard's On Through the Night album for his birthday. And so I just thought it'd be fun, a coworker. And I mean, it was really seriously only 7 songs, and I knew most of them anyway. So I showed up to the rehearsal, and the bass player just didn't learn any of the songs, made excuses for it all night, and then asked for a photo and an autograph from this other professional guitar player who's played with national acts, and then left. And and that same bass player who had a local cover band ended up texting me later to see if I wanted to join his cover band, and I just never returned his text message.
Not with your work ethic. No, thank you.
I just didn't even. Yeah, it was all just a mess. It was a long, rambling text message. And there's another tip: be succinct.
Yeah. And also, don't take an hour and a half or 2 years to get back to someone when they be punctual in terms of returning messages.
That's right.
And be succinct to what you're saying and be professional.
Yep.
And also, leave your emotional baggage at the door. There's no point for that. Like, don't be butthurt about something someone said, or don't be egotistical. Just show up, realize there's a job that has to be done, and I'm going to do that job.
It's work.
Yep, exactly. And then just leave it at that. And it's work that you love and you're putting your passion into, but at the same time, you can't bring emotional baggage into the mix. And strive your best to be as mature, best version of yourself as you possibly can.
Be wary of the cover band gig where everyone's just in it for fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Beware that.
And also be wary as you're becoming a professional musician, because it is a very difficult business, but you can navigate it if you're all into it. If that's what you're going to do, you have to basically be all in and, be able to go with the ups and downs of what happens. And it's, it's worth it, but you got to really be willing to fight it out. I think that's
and you have to be consistent for a very long time. It's so I've been teaching at Skips now for about a dozen years, and now I'm some teachers have come and gone since then, and I mean, really only as of the last 4 and 5 years do I feel like I'm one of the longer tenured. There's kind of a hierarchy, right? You have to be there for a long time and prove that you're reliable, and then you become one of the top 2 or 3 guys that gets the lead when it comes through.
Sure.
Because the goal is you need to get your roster up to around 50, 60 students a month, I think.
Yeah.
Around there to, in my opinion, to consider it full time. And of course, depending on what your rate is, that varies.
Yeah.
But just in case anyone's wondering, what does full-time teaching look like?
Yeah. Doing about 50 students a week, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, right? With some variance, but
So that's 50 half-hour lessons per week. That's what we're describing.
Yes, per week. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly.
Exactly.
So that means you're doing 200 lessons a month.
Yep, exactly. And then multiply that by many, many, many years, and that's the experience level we're talking about here. So
that's right.
It's so interesting about teaching too, is you have to be able to relate to everybody who walks in that door, and that could be a 3-year-old, 4-year-old kid, it could be an 80-year-old person, it Could be a middle-aged person who's got a career and family. It could be, a teenager. You've got to be able to find some way to connect with that person, to understand what they need from you, and to give them that. While at the same time understanding the overarching goal is to teach them how to play music well. That is people skills on an epic level. You have to be able to roll with anybody who walks in the door.
And people are vulnerable, and they've got emotional needs and challenges, and you've got to be able to roll with that.
Yeah, and you got to be able to find what's the best way to approach learning the thing that I know we need to learn, but in a way that this person can accept, and how do you dole it out? And there's so many little details in how it works. And like I said before in a previous podcast, it's a personal relationship you develop with these people too. It's not just like something that you just kind of check a box and okay, see you, bye. Who cares? You have to invest emotionally in them, and it's boy, I tell you, sometimes when you have like a 15-person day, when you've been doing it like all day, you can just be so burned out because the level of intensity you bring to each student has got to be the same for student 15 as it was for student 1. You know what I mean? And that's an all-day thing. It can be pretty challenging, but
that is challenging, man. Especially so. What do you think? Do you think the entry-level student's more challenging, or the advanced student?
It can go both ways. I think advanced students, sometimes the challenge with advanced students is that they think they know stuff they don't know, and they've skipped a bunch of things that they need to learn. So you go back, okay, that's cool. Let's go back, and this is what's called a quarter note. This is called an eighth note. And then we have to understand rhythm, because what you're doing right now has got absolutely no rhythmic sense at all. So I got to go back and rebuild you from the bottom up to kind of, and you don't understand harmony, and you don't really understand how to change keys. So you've got all these things you've learned that are kind of piecemeal that aren't going to help you at all. We had to burn you all the way down and start over. And
the verification is difficult.
Oh, it very much is. And I have some students who will tell me that they're intermediate students, and then they come in, when intermediate means to them is they can play like those couple awesome Cream songs or like a Zeppelin riff, and they can play it great. And
they finally mastered Enter Sandman.
Yeah. And I'll say, okay, well, what chord are you playing right now? And they go, I don't know. And they go, what scale are you on? Okay, well, I hate to tell you this, been playing guitar for 25 years, and you still don't know anything. So we got to go start at the very bottom and say, okay, here's the notes. This is, here's our chords. This is what rhythm is. This is how harmony works. We got to build you up, because you don't have the foundation at all. You have a bunch of it's almost like if there was a cupcake, you have a couple of the sprinkles, but you don't have any cake or a cup or anything.
Or even the icing.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to find a way to in a very hopeful, optimistic way explain that to them.
Yeah,
you're very far away from where you think you are.
The thing that's tough that I've found recently challenging is, so I'll take students through a scale method. Right, just they're the modes of the major scale, right? Just the 7 patterns. We use G major to begin with, and I'll get them through it once, and then down the road they forget.
Not even down the road, the next week they forget.
Yeah, and then I'm being generous.
Yeah.
And so I have a handful where we're doing it all again.
Yeah. For the 4th time around, and it's
until I'll teach the lesson from memory.
Yeah.
And then I'll open the book and go, here's everything we just did. You need to be able to do it the way I just did it, all from memory.
What's funny is every once in a while they go, well, I have to practice all that stuff every week? I'm like, yeah, that's what you have to do. You have to practice all that stuff every week. Yes, every week.
Hey, today's challenge bemes tomorrow's warm-up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also one of those things where yes, you have to, because music is like language or like mathematics. I always tell them, look, when you learn to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, you don't forget how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide when you go to algebra. You have to still take those same skills with you as you do in algebra. And you have to know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, do algebra when you go to geometry. And you have to know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, algebra, and geometry when you go to calculus. You have to have.
Yes, and then once you master calculus, you can start listening to Polyphia.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying, though? Well, actually, it's the same experience.
Well, actually, I suck at math, so I'm just going to take your word for it.
Well, I'm just trying to say that you have to. I'm not great at math either. I'm not claiming any high ground on that one.
I get your point. I'm sorry.
But I'm just trying to say that, you have to. There's skills that have to be built on top of each other. And if you don't have those skills, you aren't going to be able to do the thing down the line. You can't just jump straight to this other thing. You have to build your way a ladder up to that. Yeah. And if you are missing any of those rungs of that ladder, you can't get there. And I think the thing that my job as a teacher is to help you see that and walk you through it. But I can't do the work for you. That you have to be able to go home and have the discipline to be. And I'm going to do everything except for do the work for you. I'm going to show you exactly how to break a day.
Yep.
This is what you practice. This is how you approach it. Do this much time. Do this thing. Rotate like this. Just be consistent week in, week out, and you got to do it. I just always tell them, it's like, you're not doing it for a week. This is part of your life now. If you're going to be a guitar player, you have to do that. Yep, and that's just what it is to be a good guitar player. Then, 5 years from now, you'll have done it enough that it'll be really embedded. But right now, you got to do it consistently all the time. You know what I mean?
I've been thinking a lot lately about that old cliche about, you've got to learn everything and then you got to forget it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that just means that at the moment of truth, then, these things that are cemented in your memory will just naturally come out the same way that you and I are speaking
or
right now.
breathing. You don't think about it.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about what letters compose the words I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
The syntax. We just do it.
Yeah, it's funny. When it comes to improvisation, I always use that same analogy, like language. It's like when you're first starting to learn, soloing, you have to learn the scales and understand how sequencing and bending and vibrato and legato technique works and how to connect them in different keys. And then when you're really thinking about it, it's very much like language. Like when you're first learning how to speak Spanish or French, you start with vocabulary, then you start learning how to conjugate verbs and nouns and how pronouns relate to people and stuff.
Yep.
And you're really aware of the mechanics of it when you're first doing it, because you're trying to think, okay, what's the masculine pronoun for this, that kind of thing.
Yep.
But eventually, once you have fluency in that language, you just communicate. You don't have to think about the mechanical part of it, and it's the same with music. You have to get fluency, but you can't. There's no shortcut to that fluency. You have to sit down and work on it again and again and again and again and again.
Right. It's like when you learn how to cuss when you're a kid. You have to cuss a lot.
Exactly.
You have to, and then learn all the different uses for the F word.
It's true.
Yeah. So sorry, I had to go a little bit PG-13 there for a moment.
But that's just something that we talked about this before in another podcast. It's like there's no shortcuts. You have to put the work in. There's no way around it. So especially if you have aspirations of being a professional musician.
Yeah, if you're going to get paid for it, you've got to have all of that just on point.
It's totally true. Okay, that's a good place to wrap up for this amazing podcast.
Indeed.
All right, so thank you so much for listening to the Rock Guitar Confidential podcast with Ryan and Scott. We will have our socials up shortly. We will also, would appreciate it if you would rate and subscribe to our podcast. That would be great, but only with maybe 4-star reviews. We will accept that.
I've actually upped my rate to a minimum of 4.75 stars.
Okay, so that's the minimum. That's the floor.
That's how you raise your rates, folks.
Please just make sure. We're going to gradually go up to 4.8. I think that's the next podcast. We'll do that. So.
Yeah, depending on how ratings inflation goes.
Exactly.
That's right.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys.
All right. Thanks. Peace.
Bye.